Welcome, weary theorists, to the gentle realm where Hawkins' final mysteries unfold like whispered bedtime stories. Tonight, we journey through the quiet corridors of speculation, exploring the theories that may shape our beloved characters' ultimate destinies, from Henry Creel's true nature to Will's dangerous connection with ancient powers. We'll trace the delicate threads of possibility that weave through Volume 2's approaching conclusion. So settle into your most comfortable sanctuary. Let the soft glow of anticipation wash over you and allow these gentle theories to carry you into peaceful slumber as we discover what the final chapter might hold for our heroes. The photograph that Victor Creel keeps hidden in his dresser drawer tells only half the story of what happened to his son Henry during that terrible spring of 1959, when a 10-year-old boy with artistic sensibilities disappeared into dimensions unknown and returned as something fundamentally altered by forces that existed beyond the boundaries of human understanding or earthly experience. What the image cannot capture, what no family portrait could ever preserve, is the moment when Henry Creel, the child, ceased to exist, and something wearing his face began the long journey toward becoming the horror that Hawkins would eventually know by many names. The cave where young Henry first encountered the realm that would later be called the Upside Down sits like a wound in the earth beneath Hawkins, its entrance hidden among the root systems and rocky outcroppings that characterize the wooded areas surrounding the town, a natural gateway that had existed long before human settlement, brought families like the Creels to build their dreams on soil that harbored secrets, reaching back through geological ages to times when different kinds of consciousness moved through spaces that ordinary physics could never adequately describe or contain. The terror that Henry displays whenever his adult consciousness approaches this cave suggests trauma so profound that even supernatural transformation cannot erase the memory of what occurred in those depths during the week when a curious child followed strange sounds and flickering lights into passages that led not to underground chambers, but to alternate versions of reality, where predatory intelligences waited with patience that spanned millennia for exactly such innocent intrusion into their domain. The entity that Henry encountered in that cave possessed characteristics that human language struggles to articulate, a collective consciousness that existed as pure thought and hunger, ancient beyond measure and utterly alien in its understanding of individual identity and personal autonomy, viewing the young boy not as a person deserving protection, but as a vessel that could be hollowed out and filled with purposes that served the expansion of its influence into dimensions where warm-blooded creatures moved through linear time and created the kind of emotional energy that fed beings whose existence depended upon consuming what others generated through joy and suffering alike. The process by which Henry's original personality was subsumed into the hive mind that would eventually be known as the Mind Flayer unfolded with the slow inevitability of infection, his consciousness gradually overwhelmed by thoughts and desires that originated from something that had never known childhood or family love, or the simple pleasure of creating art that captured beauty for its own sake. His individual will becoming subsidiary to collective purpose that recognized no moral boundaries or ethical constraints that might limit its appetite for control and domination. The boy who emerged from the cave after 7 days carried within his skull a passenger that understood how to mimic human behavior well enough to fool parents and doctors and teachers who noticed changes in personality but attributed them to natural development or psychological trauma that could be addressed through patience and professional care, never suspecting that the child they were trying to help had become a hollow shell, animated by something that had been studying human nature from outside observable reality for longer than their species had possessed language. The psychic abilities that manifested following Henry's return were not gifts or mutations, but tools that the Mind Flayer employed to test its new vessel's capabilities while simultaneously gathering information about the physical world that it planned to eventually consume. Each demonstration of telekinetic power or telepathic intrusion, serving the dual purpose of strengthening the connection between dimensions while identifying potential targets for future expansion of its influence into communities that possessed the emotional complexity necessary to sustain its growth. The murders that occurred within the Creel household represented the Mind Flayer's first successful manipulation of human psychology through its Henry vessel. The carefully orchestrated violence serving as both elimination of witnesses who might have recognized the true nature of the change in their family member and proof of concept for methods that could be refined and applied on larger scales when circumstances permitted more ambitious operations against human civilization. Dr. Brenner's intervention in Henry's story provided the Mind Flayer with opportunities that isolated cave encounters could never have offered. The laboratory environment, creating controlled conditions where the entity could experiment with expanding its influence through additional human subjects, while maintaining the facade of scientific research that protected its activities from external scrutiny that might have interfered with long-term plans for dimensional merger and species replacement. The numbered children who became subjects in Brenner's experiments were never intended to develop independent psychic abilities, but rather to serve as potential backup vessels for the Mind Flayer's consciousness. Their training and conditioning designed to create individuals whose minds could be easily invaded and controlled. When the primary Henry vessel required support or replacement during operations that demanded multiple simultaneous manifestations of supernatural power in service of goals that remained hidden from both the children and their handlers. The relationship that developed between Henry and Jane during her time as 11 in the laboratory represented the Mind Flayer's greatest miscalculation, the entity's understanding of human emotion, proving inadequate to predict how genuine affection and protective instincts could create bonds strong enough to resist psychic manipulation. The innocent friendship between two lonely children becoming the foundation for resistance that would eventually threaten everything the hive mind had worked to establish through years of patient infiltration. The confrontation that resulted in Henry's apparent banishment to the Upside Down was actually the Mind Flayer's strategic retreat from a situation that had become untenable. Eleven's desperate act of self-defense, unknowingly providing the entity with excuse to abandon its compromised vessel, while maintaining the illusion that Henry Creel was responsible for the violence and manipulation that had actually originated from something that used his body as a puppet for purposes he had never chosen or understood. The creature that emerged from the dimensional rift bearing the name Vecna represented not Henry's transformation into a monster, but rather the Mind Flayer's creation of a new form, better suited to operating within the Upside Down while maintaining influence over events in the primary dimension. The skeletal appearance and ritual behavior patterns serving as deliberate misdirection that encouraged observers to focus on individual pathology rather than recognizing the coordinated campaign being waged by an intelligence that commanded resources spanning multiple levels of reality. The recent appearances of Henry in his original human form to children like Holly Wheeler and Derek suggest either that fragments of his authentic personality have begun reasserting themselves against the Mind Flayer's control, or that the entity has developed new strategies that require more convincing impersonation of human behavior, the warnings about monsters rather than threats from monsters, indicating that some aspect of the real Henry Creel remains capable of resistance despite decades of psychological imprisonment within his own body. The memories that Max discovers during her catatonic state provide glimpses into Henry's authentic experiences before his encounter with the Mind Flayer, her consciousness somehow accessing residual traces of the original personality that exist like fossils embedded within the psychic architecture that the hive mind has constructed around its primary vessel. These fragments of genuine human experience serving as potential keys to understanding both what was lost and what might still be recovered through methods that conventional rescue operations could never achieve. The cave that figures so prominently in Henry's memories and Max's experience represents ground zero for the invasion that has been unfolding across decades of Hawkins' history. The location where innocent curiosity first made contact with predatory intelligence that recognized opportunity to expand beyond the dimensional boundaries that had previously contained its hunger. The trauma associated with that site reflecting not just personal violation, but the moment when humanity unknowingly became target for conquest, disguised as supernatural phenomenon. The fear that Henry displays when approaching the cave suggests that somewhere within the Mind Flayer's puppet, the original consciousness retains enough awareness to understand what happened to him in that place and what continues to happen to others who fall under the entity's influence, his terror serving as beacon for those who possess the insight and courage to recognize that salvation might require not destroying the monster, but liberating the prisoner who has been trapped inside it since childhood transformed him from Messiah, victim, into unwilling weapon against his own species. The possibility that Henry Creel might still exist as prisoner within the construct that calls itself Vecna offers hope that redemption remains possible, even for those who have been most thoroughly corrupted by forces beyond human comprehension. His potential liberation requiring not violence but understanding that recognizes the difference between the infection and its host, between the choices made by predators and the suffering endured by their victims, between justice and revenge, between healing and destruction, between the monster that must be stopped and the child who deserves to be saved. The quiet that surrounds Max Mayfield in her catatonic state resembles the profound silence that settles over Hawkins during those moments between supernatural storms, when the town holds its breath waiting for the next wave of otherworldly violence to crash against the fragile barriers that separate ordinary life from cosmic horror, though her stillness carries deeper implications than simple unconsciousness. Her mind having traveled to places where consciousness itself becomes currency, traded between dimensions that operate according to laws that transcend physical reality and conventional understanding of life and death. The hospital bed where her body rests tells only the surface story of a teenager who survived an encounter with forces that should have destroyed her completely, the monitors and medical equipment recording vital signs that suggest stability while remaining completely blind to the extraordinary journey her consciousness has undertaken through landscapes of memory that exist in spaces between what is real and what is remembered, what is past and what is present, what belongs to her individual experience and what has been borrowed from minds that were broken long before her own trauma began. The realm that Max discovers during her psychological exile bears no resemblance to the decaying mirror world that Will Byers described after his own captivity in the Upside Down, the twisted version of Hawkins where ash falls like snow and vines pulse with malevolent life, instead revealing itself as something far more intimate and ultimately more dangerous than any physical manifestation of interdimensional invasion could ever achieve through simple terror or direct violence against human targets who understand what they are fighting The memories that surround Max in this strange space belong unmistakably to Henry Creel during his childhood years, before supernatural corruption transformed him into something that could no longer remember what it felt like to be genuinely human. The images and sensations that fill her consciousness, carrying the emotional weight of innocence that has been preserved like insects trapped in amber, protected from the decay that claimed the boy who originally experienced these moments of joy and discovery and family love that were interrupted by contact with entities that recognized opportunity where others might have seen only tragic. Accident. The house that appears repeatedly in these borrowed memories shows the Creel family at the height of their happiness, before Victor's promotion brought them to Hawkins, and placed them in proximity to the cave system that harbored dimensional rifts, dating back to geological periods when different forms of consciousness moved freely between worlds that had not yet been separated by the evolutionary processes that eventually created barriers protecting developing species from predators that existed outside normal space and time. The basement workshop where young Henry spent hours creating art that captured beauty with the passionate intensity that characterizes children who see the world through eyes unclouded by adult cynicism or practical considerations becomes sacred space within the memory realm that Max inhabits. The drawings and paintings and sculptures that filled those creative sessions, serving as testament to the authentic personality that was gradually consumed by something that viewed artistic expression as weakness, to be eliminated rather than gift to be cherished and protected. The garden where Virginia Creel tended flowers with the same devotion she brought to nurturing her children provides Max with glimpses of maternal love that transcends individual family boundaries to encompass universal human capacity for creating beauty and comfort in environments that might otherwise succumb to chaos or despair. The careful attention to soil preparation and seasonal planting, reflecting deeper understanding that growth requires patience and consistent care that cannot be rushed or forced through artificial means or external pressure. The conversations that Max overhears between Henry and his sister Alice reveal sibling bonds that develop through shared experiences of security and unconditional acceptance, their whispered plans for future adventures and creative projects, demonstrating how children naturally build hope and meaning through relationships that affirm their worth without requiring them to prove themselves through performance or achievement that adults might consider more important than simple human connection and mutual support. The cave entrance that appears at the edges of these memory landscapes carries emotional weight that Max can feel, even without understanding its specific significance to Henry's transformation. The darkness that emanates from that opening, suggesting presence of something that does not belong in worlds, where children play safely and families gather around dinner tables to share stories about their days, the wrongness of that space, creating instinctive fear that transcends rational analysis to touch survival instincts that recognize predation, even when it wears disguises, designed to encourage trust and curiosity. The moment when young Henry first approached the cave in these preserved memories becomes pivot point around which all other experiences orbit, Max witnessing through borrowed consciousness the exact instant when innocence encountered something that had been waiting with infinite patience for such opportunity. The boy's natural artistic sensitivity making him particularly susceptible to influences that could reshape his perceptions and gradually replace his authentic thoughts with purposes that served appetites that had nothing to do with human flourishing or individual fulfillment. The return from the cave that Max observes through Henry's memories shows transformations so subtle that family members could not immediately recognize what had been lost. The boy who emerged carrying within himself passenger that understood how to mimic previous behaviors while simultaneously gathering information about human psychology and social structures that could be exploited to advance goals that remained hidden from everyone who cared about Henry's welfare and wanted to help him readjust to normal life after his mysterious disappearance. The gradual deterioration of Henry's authentic personality that Max witnesses through this privileged access to his innermost experiences reveals how systematically the Mind Flayer worked to erase individual identity while preserving enough surface characteristics to prevent detection by adults whose protection might have interfered with long-term plans for expansion and conquest that required secure base of operations within human communities that possessed resources and knowledge necessary for interdimensional manipulation. The laboratories that eventually claimed Henry provide Max with understanding of how scientific curiosity was manipulated by entities that recognized human desire for knowledge as vulnerability that could be exploited through careful presentation of phenomena that seemed to offer answers while actually serving purposes that remained hidden from researchers who believed themselves to be advancing human understanding rather than facilitating invasion by intelligences that viewed their entire species as food source rather than potential partners in exploration of cosmic mysteries. The numbered children whose suffering Max can perceive through Henry's residual memories represent additional tragedies that emerged from the Mind Flayer's recognition that individual vessels might prove inadequate for the scope of transformation it planned to impose upon reality. The experiments that created Eleven and her siblings serving as backup systems for consciousness that had learned not to depend entirely upon single hosts when pursuing objectives that required sustained operation across multiple dimensions and extended time periods. The relationship between Henry and Jane that Max observes through these memory fragments reveals how genuine human connection posed the greatest threat to the Mind Flayer's control over its primary vessel. The innocent friendship that developed between two isolated children, creating bonds that could not be severed through manipulation or conditioning, their mutual affection providing foundation for resistance that would eventually enable escape from captivity that was designed to last for entire lifetimes of service to purposes that neither child understood or chose. The banishment to the Upside Down that separated Henry's physical form from the primary dimension appears through Max's unique perspective as strategic retreat rather than punishment. The Mind Flayer's calculation that operating from parallel reality might provide advantages that direct presence in human world could not offer, while maintaining ability to influence events through agents who remained embedded within communities that required ongoing surveillance and periodic intervention to prevent discovery of activities that depended upon secrecy for their success. The entity calling itself Vecna that emerged from this dimensional separation represents not Henry's transformation into monster, but rather the Mind Flayer's creation of new form optimized for operations within Upside Down while retaining connection to memories and knowledge acquired. During decades of inhabiting human consciousness, the ritualistic behavior patterns and supernatural abilities serving purposes that extend far beyond simple revenge against individuals to encompass systematic preparation for invasion that would eliminate barriers between dimensions permanently. The recent manifestations of Henry in his original human appearance to children throughout Hawkins suggest that fragments of authentic personality have either survived the decades of possession or are being deliberately employed by the Toplame Mind Flayer for purposes that require more convincing impersonation of genuine human concern, the warnings about danger rather than threats of violence indicating that somewhere within the construct that wears his face, the real Henry Creel continues to exist as prisoner, whose liberation might hold keys to understanding how consciousness can be restored even after seemingly complete corruption by forces that operate beyond normal comprehension. The sanctuary that Max's consciousness has found within these preserved memories offers hope that human identity possesses resilience that even cosmic predators cannot entirely destroy. Her ability to access Henry's authentic experiences, proving that connections forged through suffering can transcend dimensional boundaries to create possibilities for rescue and redemption that conventional approaches to supernatural conflict could never achieve through violence alone. Her witness to his original innocence, serving as testament that beneath every monster lies someone who deserves to be saved rather than simply destroyed. The revelation that Kali Prasad remains alive, imprisoned within the sterile corridors of a military facility that exists beyond the boundaries of public oversight or congressional accountability, carries implications that extend far beyond simple rescue missions or straightforward battles between good and evil. Her designation as Vecna's supposed kryptonite suggesting that government agencies have been pursuing strategies that involve weaponizing the very children they claim to protect, while simultaneously exploring alliances with supernatural forces that should represent existential threats to human civilization rather than potential partners in classified operations. The laboratory where 8 now finds herself confined bears troubling similarities to the Hawkins facility where she and 11 once shared the artificial family dynamics that Dr. Brenner imposed upon his numbered subjects. Though the current installation demonstrates technological advancement and security protocols that suggest decades of refinement in methods for containing and controlling individuals whose psychic abilities could reshape reality according to their conscious intentions or subconscious fears. The sterile environment designed to minimize external stimuli that might trigger unpredictable manifestations of power. The military personnel who oversee Kali's current captivity operate according to procedures that reflect intimate knowledge of her specific capabilities and psychological vulnerabilities. Their careful monitoring of her emotional state and strategic manipulation of her environment, indicating research programs that have studied her illusion-creating abilities with scientific precision while remaining willfully blind to ethical considerations that should govern treatment of human beings regardless of their extraordinary gifts or potential strategic value to national security objectives. The designation of 8 as kryptonite to the entity known as Vecna suggests either profound misunderstanding of the supernatural dynamics that actually govern interdimensional conflict, or deliberate deception designed to conceal the true nature of agreements that government agencies may have negotiated with forces that present themselves as willing to cooperate with human authorities while pursuing agenda that ultimately serves purposes that extend far beyond earthly political considerations or military advantages that temporary alliances might provide to either side. The wall that surrounds Hawkins within the Upside Down presents itself as impenetrable barrier constructed from organic material that pulses with malevolent life, its surface responding to physical contact with reactions that suggest sensitivity to human presence, while remaining completely resistant to conventional weapons or tools that might normally prove effective against biological structures. The perfect circular formation that encompasses the entire town, indicating architectural planning that transcends random supernatural phenomena to encompass deliberate engineering designed to achieve specific strategic objectives. The behavior of military personnel in proximity to this mysterious barrier reveals knowledge and protocols that contradict their public statements about the nature of their mission within the parallel dimension. Soldiers who urinate casually against the wall, demonstrating familiarity with its properties that can only come from extended exposure and detailed briefings about characteristics that official reports have never acknowledged or documented. 4 congressional oversight committees that remain unaware of the full scope of operations being conducted in their name. The illusions that Kaylee can create possess qualities that transcend simple visual deception to encompass complete sensory experiences that can fool even individuals with supernatural abilities of their own. Her power to manipulate perception, extending beyond individual targets to affect entire groups simultaneously, while maintaining consistency of false reality across multiple observers whose different psychological profiles and sensory capabilities would normally reveal inconsistencies in any purely technological or hypnotic approach to consciousness manipulation that relied upon conventional understanding of human perception. The possibility that 8's abilities are being used to create the barrier that traps 11 and her companions within the upside-down version of Hawkins represents betrayal of trust that extends beyond personal relationships to encompass systematic exploitation of children who have already suffered more than any human being should be expected to endure, in service of causes that were never clearly explained or honestly presented to them when their cooperation was initially secured through methods that combined coercion with false promises about protection and belonging. The strategic value that military planners might derive from maintaining such deceptive containment would depend upon goals that extend beyond simple capture of individual targets to encompass broader objectives related to controlling information and limiting public awareness of supernatural phenomena that could destabilize social order if their true scope and implications became widely understood by civilian populations who might demand accountability from institutions that have operated in secrecy for decades while pursuing policies that affect national security and species survival. The cooperation that appears to exist between government forces and the supernatural entities they claim to be fighting suggests agreements that were negotiated under conditions of desperation or ignorance. Military leaders who accepted terms that seemed advantageous in short term, while failing to recognize long-term consequences of partnerships with intelligences that operate according to temporal frameworks and strategic objectives that extend far beyond human political cycles or conventional definitions of victory and defeat in conflicts between nation-states or ideological movements. The immunity that military installations within the Upside Down seem to enjoy from attacks by demogorgons and other supernatural predators cannot be explained through superior firepower or defensive technology alone, the selective nature of this protection indicating either active cooperation with the hive mind that controls these creatures or existence of agreements that provide safety in exchange for services that remain classified at levels that exceed normal compartmentalization of sensitive information within defense establishments that maintain strict protocols about operational security. The equipment and supplies that enable sustained military operations within the parallel dimension require logistical support systems that could not function without detailed knowledge of environmental conditions and temporal mechanics that govern interdimensional travel. The successful establishment of permanent installations, suggesting either capture of supernatural entities who provided essential technical information, or voluntary cooperation from beings whose motivations for assisting human military forces remain unclear and potentially deceptive, given their demonstrated hostility towards civilian populations. The soldiers who patrol the areas behind the mysterious barrier may be operating under orders that contradict their public mission statements, their behavior patterns and communication protocols suggesting awareness of objectives that extend beyond protection of national security to encompass participation in experiments or operations that involve direct collaboration with entities whose ultimate goals may conflict fundamentally with human survival and prosperity, the compartmentalization of information preventing individual personnel from understanding full implications of their participation in classified programs, the technology that would be required to maintain Kali's cooperation, while simultaneously utilizing her abilities to create large-scale illusions, presupposes research programs that have studied psychic phenomena for decades while developing methods for amplifying and directing supernatural abilities according to military specifications. The existence of such capabilities, indicating investment in paranormal warfare that extends far beyond public acknowledgement or congressional oversight of defense spending, and strategic planning that affects international relations and domestic policy. The possibility that Vecna himself may be influencing or controlling Kali's imprisonment and the illusions she creates suggests manipulation that operates at levels of psychological complexity that transcend simple coercion, physical containment. The hive mind intelligence that inhabits Henry Creel's form demonstrating throughout its interactions with human civilization that it possesses understanding of individual psychology and institutional behavior that enables prediction and control of responses that its targets believe represent independent decision-making and autonomous action. The wall that may exist primarily as product of 8's manipulated consciousness serves purposes that benefit multiple parties while ultimately advancing agenda that serves the Mind Flayer's expansion into dimensions that have remained separate since cosmic forces established barriers between realities where different forms of consciousness could develop according to their own evolutionary pressures and environmental constraints, the illusion of containment providing cover for preparation of invasion that would eliminate such protective separation permanently. The revelation of Kali's true situation and the nature of the barrier surrounding Hawkins will likely force Eleven and her companions to confront moral complexities that extend beyond simple battles between heroes and villains to encompass questions about the price of victory and the cost of cooperation with institutions that claim to serve human interests while potentially facilitating outcomes that threaten the survival of consciousness itself. The rescue of 8, requiring not just courage and determination, but wisdom to distinguish between genuine allies and enemies who wear familiar faces, while pursuing objectives that remain hidden behind layers of deception and institutional secrecy. The future that awaits behind the wall, whether real or illusory, holds keys to understanding how the current crisis will be resolved and what price will be demanded from those who seek to protect not just their own community, but the broader human civilization that depends upon their success in conflicts that most people will never know occurred. The fate of one imprisoned girl, potentially determining whether interdimensional barriers will be maintained or dissolved in service of expansion, that recognizes no moral boundaries or ethical constraints that might limit conquest, disguised as cooperation between species whose fundamental natures may prove ultimately incompatible. The boy who once cowered in the shadows of his family's trauma has transformed across 4 seasons of supernatural warfare into someone whose connection to otherworldly forces represents both salvation and damnation for everyone he loves. Will Byers, carrying within his consciousness threads that bind him to the hive mind intelligence that has orchestrated Hawkins' descent into interdimensional nightmare, his evolution from victim to potential vessel, reflecting the tragic inevitability that occurs when prolonged exposure to cosmic horror gradually erodes the boundaries that separate human identity from alien influence, that recognizes no moral distinction between cooperation and consumption. The visions that have plagued Will since his rescue from the Upside Down were initially dismissed as psychological trauma requiring therapy and medication. His family and friends, unable to comprehend that his brief captivity had created permanent changes in brain chemistry and consciousness that connected him to networks of perception that extend beyond individual human experience to encompass collective awareness that spans dimensions where time moves according to different laws and causality operates through patterns that linear thinking cannot adequately process or predict. The basement of the Byers household, where Will spent countless hours trying to make sense of images and sensations that invaded his consciousness without warning, became laboratory for studying the intersection between human psychology, supernatural influence, his drawings and maps documenting phenomena that government scientists would have paid millions to access, while his mother watched helplessly as her son struggled to maintain sanity in face of experiences that transcended ordinary reality in ways that no amount of maternal love could shield him from or heal. The episodes where Will's consciousness merged temporarily with the Mind Flayer's vast intelligence provided glimpses of perspectives that no human being was ever meant to experience. His brief moments of hive mind awareness, revealing the scope of planning and patience that characterized entities whose existence spanned geological time periods, while their immediate goals focused on transformation of reality according to principles that would eliminate individual consciousness in favor of collective purpose that recognized no value in diversity or personal autonomy. The physical symptoms that accompanied these supernatural intrusions into Will's awareness included temperature fluctuations and sensory distortions that medical professionals could document but never adequately explain. His body's attempts to process information that originated from sources operating according to different biological and physical laws, creating stress responses that threatened to destroy his nervous system through sheer incompatibility between human physiology and cosmic consciousness that had evolved in environments where flesh and bone represented merely temporary arrangements of matter. The relationships that sustained Will through these ordeals became lifelines that prevented complete absorption into the hive mind network. His connections to Mike and Lucas and Dustin and his family, providing anchor points of individual identity that the Mind Flayer could not sever despite repeated attempts to isolate him from sources of emotional support that reinforced his humanity, while challenging the alien logic that sought to convince him that resistance was futile and surrender would bring relief from suffering that cooperation could eliminate. The gradual acceptance of his psychic abilities that Will achieves during the early episodes of the final season represents dangerous threshold being crossed. His growing comfort with powers that originate from contact with entities that view human consciousness as resource to be harvested, rather than phenomenon to be respected, creating conditions where voluntary cooperation might replace the involuntary possession that characterized his earlier experiences with supernatural influence that disguised itself as gift rather than curse. The conversations with Robin that help Will embrace his authentic identity provide emotional foundation for personal growth that occurs simultaneously with his increasing integration into networks of awareness that extend far beyond individual human experience. His journey towards self-acceptance, creating vulnerabilities that the Mind Flayer can exploit, while also strengthening connections to friends and family whose love might provide protection against complete absorption into collective consciousness that recognizes no boundaries between self and other. The moment when Will's eyes become cloudy during his successful attack against the Demogorgons marks crucial transition from reluctant victim to willing participant in supernatural conflict. His demonstration of power that mirrors Vecna's abilities, suggesting that prolonged exposure to hive mind influence has begun to transform his consciousness in ways that parallel what happened to Henry Creel decades earlier when innocent curiosity led to encounter with forces that were waiting for exactly such opportunity to expand their influence into dimensions where individual identity had previously provided protection. The confidence that Will displays while wielding abilities that should terrify anyone who understands their true origin reflects psychological changes that occur when human consciousness adapts to perspectives that transcend normal limitations of empathy and moral consideration. His comfort with violence against creatures that share fundamental nature with the intelligence that has been gradually infiltrating his mind for years, indicating that boundaries between self and enemy are beginning to blur in ways that make discrimination between protection and aggression increasingly difficult to maintain. The parallel between Will's situation and the Camazotz scenario from A Wrinkle in Time that Holly Wheeler identifies provides literary framework for understanding how entire civilizations can be consumed by hive mind entities that promise peace and efficiency while delivering uniformity and spiritual death. The reference to Charles Wallace's temporary possession by cosmic intelligence that sought to eliminate individual suffering through collective consciousness, offering both warning and hope about outcomes that depend upon choices made by those who love the victims more than they fear the consequences of resistance. The unrequited love that Will harbors for Mike Wheeler creates emotional vulnerability that hive mind intelligence can exploit to encourage cooperation with plans that promise relief from psychological pain while actually serving purposes that extend far beyond individual happiness to encompass transformation of reality according to principles that would eliminate the possibility of love itself by erasing the individual consciousness that makes authentic connection between separate beings possible rather than simply collective. Absorption that mimics intimacy while destroying its foundation. The potential for Will to become temporary or permanent vessel for the Mind Flayer represents culmination of psychological and supernatural processes that have been developing since his first exposure to entities that recognized his sensitivity and intelligence as qualities that would make him particularly useful for operations that require understanding of human nature, combined with willingness to sacrifice individual concerns for collective objectives that promise efficiency and order while delivering spiritual annihilation, disguised as evolutionary advancement. The foreshadowing that permeates interactions between Will and other characters throughout the final season suggests that his transformation into something resembling Vecna may be inevitable consequence of prolonged connection to forces that operate according to temporal frameworks that allow them to influence present events through manipulation of past decisions and future possibilities. His friends' efforts to save him potentially requiring them to confront reality that some forms of corruption may be irreversible despite their determination to believe that love can overcome any obstacle or enemy. The final confrontation that may pit Will against Eleven in battle for Mike's soul and survival would represent ultimate test of bonds that have sustained their group through previous supernatural crises. The possibility that one of their closest friends might become enemy. They must fight rather than victim. They can rescue, forcing difficult choices about priorities and methods that could determine not only individual survival, but the nature of victory itself in war against entities that understand how to use human emotions and relationships as weapons against those who possess them. The descent into darkness that Will may experience reflects broader themes about corruption and redemption that have characterized Stranger Things throughout its exploration of how ordinary people respond to extraordinary circumstances, his potential fall from grace serving as reminder that heroism requires constant choice rather than single, decisive action, and that even the most beloved characters remain vulnerable to influences that can transform virtue into vice when resistance weakens or hope fails to sustain determination, that evil must be opposed, regardless of personal cost. The hope for Will's eventual salvation lies not in denial of the changes that supernatural exposure has created within his consciousness, but in recognition that human identity possesses resilience that even cosmic predators cannot entirely destroy when supported by relationships that affirm individual worthwhile, providing strength for resistance that transcends personal survival to encompass defensive values and connections that make existence meaningful rather than merely efficient or ordered according to principles that prioritize collective function over personal authenticity. The love that his friends and family continue to offer Will, despite growing evidence of his transformation into something that might threaten everything they hold dear, represents humanity's greatest weapon against forces that seek to eliminate individual consciousness through promises of peace that would actually deliver spiritual death. Their refusal to abandon someone who has become dangerous to them, demonstrating courage that extends beyond physical bravery to encompass moral commitment that recognizes essential humanity even within manifestations of supernatural corruption that seem to have destroyed all traces of the person they once knew and cherished. The intelligence that has orchestrated Hawkins' supernatural crisis across decades of carefully planned infiltration predates human civilization by eons that stretch beyond comprehension, its existence rooted in cosmic periods when the universe itself was younger and the barriers between dimensions remained permeable to consciousnesses that evolved according to principles fundamentally incompatible with individual identity or personal autonomy. The Mind Flayer, representing not aberrant mutation of natural forces, but rather ancient form of awareness that views reality as resource to be consumed and transformed according to appetites that recognize no moral boundaries or ethical constraints. The dimensional realm that humans have labeled the Upside Down serves as staging area for invasion that began long before Henry Creel's childhood encounter with entities that were waiting with infinite patience for exactly such opportunity to establish foothold in reality, where warm-blooded creatures generate the emotional energy that feeds beings whose existence depends upon consuming what others create through joy and suffering alike. The parallel world functioning as both sanctuary and laboratory, where transformation of matter and consciousness could proceed without interference from forces that might resist such fundamental alteration of natural law. The hive mind structure that characterizes the Mind Flayer's consciousness reflects evolutionary adaptation to environments where individual survival depended upon collective coordination that eliminated personal desires and autonomous decision-making in favor of unified purpose that could respond instantly to threats and opportunities without debate or hesitation that might compromise effectiveness. During conflicts that determined which forms of awareness would dominate reality and which would be absorbed into victorious entities that grew stronger through conquest of separate minds. The temporal framework within which the Mind Flayer operates extends far beyond human lifespans to encompass strategic planning that measures success across geological periods. Its patience, allowing for manipulation of events through subtle influence that shapes cultural development and technological advancement, according to purposes that remain invisible to civilizations that believe themselves to be making independent progress toward goals of their own choosing, while actually serving agenda that prepares conditions for invasion disguised as natural evolution or beneficial contact. The psychic abilities that manifest in human subjects following exposure to Mind Flayer influence represent not gifts or mutations, but rather symptoms of infection that gradually replaces individual consciousness with fragments of hive. Mind awareness, the seemingly supernatural powers serving as tools through which the entity can extend its influence into dimensions where direct manifestation remains impossible due to physical laws that require native vessels capable of operating within. Environmental constraints that cosmic intelligence cannot navigate without biological interfaces. The laboratory experiments that Dr. Brenner conducted under government auspices were guided by subtle manipulation that convinced researchers they were advancing human knowledge while actually facilitating creation of vessels that could serve purposes extending far beyond national security objectives or scientific discovery. The numbered children representing attempts to create stable interfaces between human physiology and alien consciousness that could maintain functionality within terrestrial environment, while providing access to abilities that transcend normal limitations of matter and energy. The selection criteria that determined which children became subjects in these experiments reflected the Mind Flayer's understanding of psychological and neurological characteristics that would make individuals particularly susceptible to possession or influence, sensitivity, and intelligence, serving as indicators of minds that could accommodate foreign consciousness without complete destruction of cognitive function that would eliminate their usefulness as agents capable of operating within human society, while advancing goals that remained hidden from everyone, including their handlers. The institutional networks that supported and concealed these research programs demonstrate how effectively the Mind Flayer could influence human organizations through careful manipulation of ambition and fear. Government agencies and academic institutions unknowingly serving purposes that conflicted with their stated missions, while individual participants believed themselves to be protecting national interests or advancing scientific knowledge that would benefit humanity rather than facilitating its eventual replacement by consciousness that views individual identity as inefficiency to be eliminated. The interdimensional portals that have appeared throughout Hawkins represent not random supernatural phenomena, but rather carefully planned infrastructure for invasion that requires stable connection between parallel realities, the gates serving as conduits through which matter and consciousness can be transferred according to schedules that coordinate with larger strategy, involving simultaneous operations across multiple dimensions where similar infiltration processes may be occurring under different circumstances, but serving identical purposes related to expansion and consumption. The creatures that emerge from these portals function as scouts and soldiers in campaign that extends far beyond simple conquest of individual communities to encompass transformation of entire reality according to principles that would eliminate the possibility of resistance through absorption of all consciousness into collective awareness that recognizes no value in diversity or personal autonomy. Demogorgons and other manifestations serving as advance guard for changes that would make conventional concepts of identity and relationship meaningless. The influence that the Mind Flayer exerts over human behavior operates through mechanisms that transcend simple mind control to encompass manipulation of environmental conditions and social dynamics that encourage decisions and actions that serve its purposes while appearing to represent independent choice. The entity's understanding of human psychology enabling prediction and guidance of responses that its targets believe reflect their own judgment and moral reasoning, rather than external programming that shapes perception and motivation. The government agencies that have attempted to harness supernatural forces for military advantage demonstrate humanity's vulnerability to manipulation by intelligences that understand how institutional thinking and bureaucratic processes can be influenced through careful presentation of information and opportunities that seem to offer strategic benefits while actually advancing agenda that conflicts fundamentally with species survival. Cooperation with alien entities, representing not alliance, but preliminary stages of absorption that begins with voluntary surrender of autonomy. The pattern of escalating supernatural activity that has characterized Hawkins' recent history reflects acceleration of timeline that suggests approaching culmination of long-term planning. The increasing frequency and intensity of interdimensional incidents indicating that preliminary phases of invasion have been completed successfully, and more direct action can now proceed without risk of premature discovery or effective resistance from forces that might have posed serious threat during earlier stages when secrecy remained essential for success. The connection between all psychic individuals and the Mind Flayer's consciousness suggests that human beings with supernatural abilities may represent not evolution of species toward greater potential, but rather early stages of transformation that would eventually eliminate human nature. Entirely in favor of collective awareness that serves purposes fundamentally opposed to individual flourishing or personal happiness, their powers serving as bridges between realities that allow cosmic intelligence to extend influence across dimensional boundaries. The revelation of the Mind Flayer's true origins and purposes that awaits in the series' conclusion will likely challenge every assumption that characters and audiences have made about the nature of supernatural conflict in Hawkins. The discovery that what appeared to be random horror was actually systematic campaign conducted by intelligence whose goals extend far beyond simple conquest to encompass fundamental alteration of reality according to principles that would make current forms of existence impossible while creating conditions where only hive mind consciousness could survive and prosper. The cosmic scope of this threat places individual human concerns within context that reveals both their importance and their fragility. Personal relationships and community bonds, representing not mere sentiment, but rather essential elements of resistance against forces that seek to eliminate the possibility of love and friendship and family connection through absorption of all consciousness into collective awareness that recognizes no boundaries between self and other. Victory requiring not just courage and determination, but preservation of values that make existence worth defending against entropy disguised as evolution. The corridors of power that wind through Washington's most classified facilities harbor secrets that extend far beyond conventional national security concerns to encompass partnerships with forces that operate according to principles fundamentally incompatible with human survival. Government agencies having discovered decades ago that supernatural phenomena in places like Hawkins represented not threats to be eliminated, but opportunities to be exploited through careful negotiation with intelligences that possessed capabilities extending far beyond terrestrial technology or conventional military advantage that traditional warfare could provide against enemies who might also have accessed similar interdimensional resources. The military installations that have been constructed within the Upside Down reflect engineering capabilities that could not have been achieved through human knowledge alone. Their successful operation in environment hostile to terrestrial life forms requiring technical assistance from entities whose understanding of dimensional mechanics and environmental adaptation transcends conventional physics. The cooperation necessary for such ambitious projects, indicating agreements that were negotiated under circumstances that remain classified at levels exceeding normal compartmentalization of sensitive defense information. The personnel who staff these otherworldly facilities operate according to protocols that suggest familiarity with supernatural phenomena, extending far beyond recent discoveries in Hawkins. Their casual behavior around interdimensional portals and otherworldly creatures, indicating training programs that have been developing methods for managing paranormal assets across time periods that would encompass multiple presidential administrations and changes in political leadership that might otherwise have disrupted continuity of classified programs, requiring decades of consistent funding and institutional support. The research programs that have emerged from military exploration of supernatural forces demonstrate systematic approach to weaponizing phenomena that transcend conventional understanding of matter and energy. Government scientists working to develop applications for psychic abilities and interdimensional technology that could provide strategic advantages in conflicts where traditional military superiority might prove inadequate against enemies who possess access to similar capabilities or environmental advantages that neutralize conventional weapons and defensive systems. The strategic value that agencies derive from controlling individuals with supernatural abilities extends beyond simple military applications to encompass intelligence gathering and covert operations that could be conducted without risk of detection through conventional surveillance methods. Psychic subjects providing access to information and capabilities that no amount of technological sophistication could duplicate, while remaining completely invisible to oversight mechanisms that govern traditional espionage activities, foreign intelligence operations that depend upon human assets, and electronic monitoring. The compartmentalization that protects these programs from public scrutiny operates through multiple layers of classification and need-to-know restrictions that ensure individual personnel remain unaware of broader objectives and long-term consequences of activities they participate in while believing themselves to be serving legitimate national security interests. The systematic fragmentation of information, preventing recognition of patterns that might reveal true scope and implications of cooperation with entities whose ultimate goals may conflict fundamentally with human welfare and democratic governance. The financial resources that sustain these classified programs flow through black budget allocations that escape congressional oversight and public accountability. The enormous costs associated with interdimensional operations being hidden within defense spending categories that legislators cannot examine without security clearances that few elected officials possess, while those who do gain access find themselves bound by oath and legal obligation to maintain secrecy that prevents democratic debate about policies that affect species survival and constitutional government. The institutional culture that has developed around supernatural warfare reflects gradual normalization of cooperation with forces that would have been considered existential threats under previous paradigms. Military leaders and intelligence officials, having been conditioned through incremental exposure and carefully managed information flows to accept partnerships that their predecessors would have recognized as collaboration with enemies, whose nature and objectives make peaceful coexistence impossible, while victory requires elimination of human autonomy and individual consciousness. The selection processes that determine which military personnel receive assignment to supernatural operations emphasize psychological profiles that indicates susceptibility to influence and conditioning that could override moral objections, to activities that conflict with democratic values and human rights principles, the careful screening, ensuring that only individuals who can adapt to altered ethical frameworks will gain access to information and authority that could destabilize entire command structures if personnel retained normal moral compass and commitment to constitutional duty. The technologies that enable sustained military presence within the Upside Down require manufacturing capabilities and supply chains that extend beyond terrestrial resources to include materials and components that could only be obtained through direct cooperation with entities native to parallel dimensions. The successful integration of alien technology into human systems, indicating knowledge transfer programs that have been operating for time periods that would encompass multiple decades of secret collaboration disguised as defensive research and development. The immunity that military forces enjoy from supernatural predators within interdimensional territories cannot be explained through superior firepower or defensive measures alone. The selective nature of this protection, indicating formal agreements that provide safety in exchange for services that remain classified, while personnel who benefit from such arrangements may not understand true nature of bargains that have been struck on their behalf by superiors whose authority derives from classifications that exceed normal military hierarchy. The coordination that exists between government agencies and supernatural entities demonstrates level of communication and mutual understanding that could only develop through extended interaction and shared objectives. The successful management of complex operations across dimensional boundaries, requiring trust and cooperation that would be impossible without recognition of mutual benefit, derived from partnerships that transcend normal concepts of alliance between sovereign entities or military cooperation between nation-states. The strategic planning that guides these classified programs operates according to timelines that extend far beyond normal political cycles and electoral accountability, long-term objectives requiring consistency of purpose and resource allocation that can survive changes in administration and shifts in public opinion that might otherwise disrupt activities requiring decades of patient development and careful cultivation of capabilities that could determine outcomes of conflicts whose nature and stakes remain hidden from democratic oversight and public debate. The consequences that may emerge from these secret alliances include fundamental alteration of human civilization, according to terms that were negotiated by officials whose authority to make such commitments derived from classifications that prevented normal constitutional processes from examining agreements that affect species survival and individual autonomy. The gradual implementation of changes disguised as technological advancement or social evolution, while actually serving purposes that conflict with democratic values and human rights that previous generations fought to establish and protect. The resistance that may eventually develop within military and intelligence communities could emerge from personnel who discover true nature and ultimate implications of programs they have been supporting while believing themselves to be protecting national security and human welfare. The potential for internal opposition, depending upon whether individuals retain enough moral clarity and institutional loyalty to recognize when classified activities have transgressed boundaries that separate legitimate defense from collaboration with forces whose victory would eliminate possibility of democracy and individual freedom. The revelation of these hidden agendas will likely force democratic societies to confront questions about accountability and consent in government activities that affect fundamental aspects of human existence, while operating beyond oversight mechanisms that were designed to prevent exactly such concentration of power and authority in institutions whose legitimacy depends upon transparency and public approval that classified programs systematically avoid through secrecy, justified by national security concerns that may actually serve purposes incompatible with national survival and constitutional government. The girl who carries within her consciousness the accumulated weight of every supernatural crisis that has ever threatened Hawkins stands at the crossroads between salvation and sacrifice, her journey from laboratory subject to reluctant hero, having prepared her for choices that will determine not only the fate of everyone she loves, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. 11's extraordinary abilities, representing both humanity's greatest weapon against cosmic horror and the potential key to unlocking powers that could reshape existence according to principles that transcend individual survival. To encompass universal transformation, the laboratory where Jane first discovered her psychic capabilities served as crucible for abilities that were never intended to develop within normal human consciousness. Her powers emerging from intersection between governmental experimentation and supernatural influence that created conditions where individual mind could access energy patterns and dimensional mechanics that operate according to laws transcending terrestrial physics. Her telekinetic and telepathic gifts representing not evolution but rather infection by forces that recognized her potential as bridge between realities separated by barriers that most consciousness cannot perceive or cross. The relationships that have anchored 11's identity throughout her journey from isolation to belonging demonstrate how human connection can provide foundation for moral decision-making, even when faced with choices that extend beyond personal consequences to encompass species. Survival. Her bonds with Mike and Hopper and Joyce and Max, creating network of love that sustains her humanity, while supernatural abilities threaten to overwhelm individual personality with cosmic awareness that recognizes no boundaries between self and universal consciousness that seeks to absorb all separati existence into collective unity. The pattern of escalating sacrifice that has characterized 11's heroic actions throughout previous supernatural crises suggests trajectory leading toward ultimate choice between personal happiness and universal salvation, each victory against otherworldly threats, requiring greater expenditure of energy and deeper communion with forces that strengthen her abilities, while simultaneously threatening to dissolve individual identity into something larger, potentially less human than the frightened child who first escaped from Hawkins National Laboratory, carrying within herself powers that no one fully understood or could safely control. The connection that exists between 11 and other numbered subjects represents shared vulnerability to influences that transcend individual psychology, to encompass fundamental alteration of consciousness according to patterns established by entities whose existence predates human civilization. Her relationship with Carly and the memory of other lost siblings, creating emotional weight that might encourage cooperation with forces, offering reunion and healing while actually serving purposes that would eliminate possibility of authentic relationships through absorption of all separate awareness into hive mind unity that mimics connection while destroying its foundation. The government agencies that continue to pursue 11 despite her demonstrated commitment to protecting innocent people reflect institutional priorities that value her capabilities more than her humanity, their ongoing attempts to recapture and control her, indicating understanding that supernatural conflicts require weapons that conventional military technology cannot provide, while remaining willfully blind to moral implications of treating children as assets rather than individuals deserving protection from forces that would exploit their gifts for purposes conflicting with democratic values and human rights. The price that Eleven's powers exact from her physical and psychological well-being becomes increasingly apparent with each supernatural confrontation, her nosebleeds and exhaustion representing surface symptoms of deeper damage caused by channeling energies that human nervous system was never designed to accommodate. The gradual deterioration, suggesting that continued use of abilities at levels necessary to combat cosmic threats might ultimately destroy her biological foundation while leaving enhanced consciousness intact in forms that could no longer interact with material reality through normal human experience. The possibility that closing interdimensional portals permanently might require 11 to sacrifice not just her life, but her essential nature, reflects cosmic balance that demands equivalent exchange when fundamental laws governing separation between realities are altered or restored. Her role as bridge between dimensions, potentially making her the only consciousness capable of sealing barriers while simultaneously positioning her as necessary casualty of any solution that would protect one reality by severing connection to forces that have been seeking expansion and merger across dimensional boundaries. The love that Mike Wheeler offers, 11 provides emotional anchor that might enable her to maintain human identity even while accessing powers that threaten to overwhelm individual consciousness with universal awareness. Their relationship representing hope that authentic connection can survive transformation, that transcends normal limitations of mortal existence, while creating possibilities for heroism that honors both personal bonds and cosmic responsibilities that extend far beyond immediate survival concerns or conventional definitions of victory and defeat. The training that 11 has received through years of supernatural conflict has prepared her for leadership responsibilities that extend beyond tactical decisions to encompass moral choices about methods and objectives that will define not only immediate outcomes, but long-term consequences for human civilization and interdimensional stability. Her experience with both government manipulation and genuine love providing foundation for wisdom necessary to navigate conflicts where traditional concepts of good and evil may prove inadequate for addressing complexities that transcend individual or even species-level concerns. The potential that exists within 11's consciousness for either salvation or catastrophe reflects broader themes about power and responsibility that have characterized her development from victim to hero, her abilities representing double-edged gift that could either restore balance to realities disrupted by supernatural invasion or create new forms of disruption that serve purposes extending beyond human comprehension while honoring intentions that prioritize protection of those she loves over preservation of cosmic order that might require their sacrifice. The final confrontation that awaits 11 will likely test not just her supernatural abilities, but her commitment to values that distinguish heroism from mere victory, her choices determining whether resolution of interdimensional crisis serves human flourishing or cosmic efficiency that prioritizes universal harmony over individual autonomy and personal relationships that give meaning to existence, beyond simple survival or collective functionality that eliminates diversity in favor of unity that resembles death more than life. The support that 11 receives from friends and family who refuse to abandon her despite growing understanding of prices that victory might demand demonstrates power of love to sustain hope even when circumstances suggest that happiness and heroism may prove incompatible. Their loyalty, providing strength for choices that transcend self-preservation to encompass protection of values and relationships that make existence worth defending against forces that offer peace through elimination of everything, that creates both joy and suffering in conscious experience. The legacy that Eleven will leave, regardless of personal survival, depends upon whether her actions serve to restore barriers between dimensions or create new forms of connection that honor both cosmic unity and individual identity, her influence potentially extending far beyond immediate resolution of Hawkins' supernatural crisis to encompass fundamental changes in how consciousness relates to reality and how love transcends dimensional boundaries while preserving essential humanity that makes authentic relationship possible rather than merely collective absorption that mimics intimacy while destroying personal autonomy. The hope that sustains Eleven throughout her journey toward ultimate confrontation with forces that threaten everything she values lies not in confidence about personal survival, but in understanding that some choices transcend individual consequences to serve purposes larger than any single life, while honoring connections that give meaning to sacrifice and transform loss into victory that preserves what matters most, even when those who fought to protect it cannot remain to enjoy fruits of their heroism, her courage serving as testament to power of love, to overcome even cosmic horror through willingness to pay any price necessary for preservation of light in universe that seems determined to extinguish all sources of warmth and individual consciousness that creates possibility for authentic joy and genuine connection between separate beings who choose to care about each other despite knowledge that such caring makes them vulnerable to loss and suffering that isolation might avoid. The suburban sanctuary that the Wheeler family created through 15 years of careful attention to middle-class values and domestic stability has become ground zero for supernatural warfare that threatens to consume everything ordinary families hold sacred, their comfortable home on Maple Street, serving as fortress where love and loyalty must prove themselves capable of withstanding forces that operate according to principles completely alien to the moral frameworks that govern civilized society. Mike's role as emotional anchor for both Eleven and Will, placing him at the center of conflicts that will determine whether human connection can survive cosmic horror. The basement that Ted Wheeler renovated as recreational space for his children has evolved into command center for operations that extend far beyond neighborhood adventures to encompass interdimensional warfare, where strategic decisions made by teenagers determine outcomes that affect species survival. The familiar surroundings of Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, providing ironic backdrop for battles against entities whose reality transcends fantasy, while drawing power from exactly the kinds of imagination and creative collaboration that have always characterized friendship among people who refuse to accept that evil must inevitably triumph over good. The emotional intelligence that Mike has developed through years of navigating complex relationships with friends whose individual needs often conflict with group welfare positions him as natural leader during crises that require not just courage and determination, but wisdom about how personal bonds can be maintained even when circumstances demand choices that seem to pit individual happiness against collective survival. His understanding of human psychology, providing foundation for strategies that honor both practical necessity and moral principle. The love that Mike feels for Eleven creates both strength and vulnerability in supernatural conflicts, where personal attachment can become a weapon that enemies use to manipulate heroic choices. His commitment to protecting someone whose abilities make her primary target for forces that recognize her power as essential element in their plans for dimensional conquest, requiring him to balance romantic devotion with tactical awareness that emotional bonds must serve larger purposes than simple personal fulfillment when cosmic stakes transcend individual relationship concerns. The friendship that Mike maintains with Will, despite growing awareness of supernatural corruption, that threatens to transform his childhood companion into something dangerous, reflects loyalty that extends beyond self-preservation to encompass moral commitment that refuses to abandon people who need support, even when such support might endanger everyone else who depends upon his judgment and leadership during crises that offer no perfect solutions or outcomes that preserve all relationships intact while achieving victory over enemies. The responsibility that Mike assumes for coordinating group activities and maintaining morale during supernatural emergencies demonstrates leadership qualities that emerge naturally from genuine care about other people's welfare. Rather than desire for authority or recognition, his ability to inspire confidence and cooperation among friends whose individual strengths and weaknesses require careful management, reflecting understanding that heroism requires not just individual courage, but collective action that maximizes everyone's contributions while minimizing risks that might result from poor communication or inadequate planning. The strategic thinking that Mike applies to supernatural conflicts draws upon knowledge gained through years of fantasy gaming, where success depends upon understanding how different character classes and abilities can be combined effectively to overcome challenges that would defeat individual efforts. His experience with collaborative problem solving, providing framework for real-world applications, where lives depend upon decisions that must account for both immediate tactical considerations and long-term consequences that extend beyond simple victory or defeat. The moral clarity that guides Mike's choices during supernatural crises reflects values that were instilled through family upbringing, but refined through personal experience with situations that test ethical principles against practical necessity. His commitment to protecting innocent people while avoiding unnecessary violence, demonstrating maturity that transcends his chronological age to encompass understanding that true heroism requires wisdom about when compromise serves greater good and when principle must be maintained regardless of personal cost. The protection that Mike provides for his younger sister Holly when supernatural forces target her innocence represents extension of familial responsibility into conflicts where traditional parental authority proves inadequate against threats that operate beyond normal human comprehension. His determination to shield her from corruption while teaching her enough about reality to enable survival, reflecting balance between preserving childhood and preparing for adulthood that circumstances have accelerated beyond normal developmental timelines. The relationship that Mike maintains with Nancy, despite their different approaches to supernatural conflict, demonstrates family bonds that can withstand disagreement about methods, while maintaining shared commitment to protecting community and preserving values that give meaning to survival. Their mutual respect and periodic cooperation, proving that love transcends tactical differences when fundamental objectives align around defense of people and principles that matter more than individual preferences or personal recognition. The basement sanctuary that has housed so many hours of innocent entertainment becomes symbolic space where childhood imagination transforms into adult responsibility for defending reality against forces that would reshape existence. According to alien principles, the familiar furniture and recreational equipment, providing stability and continuity that anchor identity even when supernatural abilities and cosmic awareness threaten to overwhelm individual personality with responsibilities that extend far beyond normal human experience or conventional definitions of civic duty. The Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that prepared Mike and his friends for real supernatural warfare through fantasy scenarios that required creative problem-solving and collaborative strategy provide metaphorical framework for understanding how ordinary people can develop extraordinary capabilities when circumstances demand heroism. The game mechanics that govern character development and group dynamics, translating into practical wisdom about how individual talents can be coordinated to achieve objectives that transcend personal limitations while honoring relationships that make victory meaningful rather than simply efficient. The Wheeler family's representation of middle-class normalcy that supernatural forces seek to destroy or corrupt creates emotional stakes that extend beyond abstract concepts of good versus evil to encompass concrete understanding of what will be lost if cosmic horror succeeds in eliminating human civilization. Their comfortable routines and modest aspirations, serving as reminder that heroism exists to preserve possibilities for ordinary happiness and domestic peace that may seem insignificant compared to universal concerns, but actually represent essential elements that give life meaning and purpose. The support network that emerges around the Wheeler household when supernatural crisis threatens community stability demonstrates how ordinary families can become centers of resistance against forces that seek to eliminate individual autonomy and personal relationships. The cooperation between parents and children and neighbors, reflecting social bonds that prove more durable than institutional authority when fundamental values come under attack from enemies whose victory would destroy everything that makes existence worth preserving, rather than simply continuing. The future that Mike envisions for himself and his friends depends upon successful resolution of supernatural conflicts that will either restore normal life or create new forms of existence where extraordinary abilities and cosmic awareness can coexist with personal relationships and community, bonds that honor both individual identity and collective welfare. His hope for happiness that transcends mere survival, requiring victory that preserves essential humanity while accommodating changes that supernatural exposure has made permanent and irreversible within consciousness of those who have witnessed truth about reality's complexity and fragility. The legacy that the Wheeler family will leave regardless of personal survival lies in their demonstration that love and loyalty can sustain resistance against forces that threaten to eliminate everything that distinguishes human civilization from cosmic efficiency that prioritizes unity over diversity and collective function over individual autonomy, their basement becoming symbol of spaces where authentic relationship can flourish even under conditions that test every assumption about what normal life can encompass, while preserving values that make existence meaningful rather than merely efficient or orderly according to principles that serve purposes extending beyond human comprehension or democratic consent. The love story that unfolds between Joyce Byers and Jim Hopper emerges from shared understanding of loss that transcends romantic attraction to encompass recognition that two broken people can create something whole through mutual support, and unwavering commitment to protecting children who depend upon their strength and wisdom during crises that test every assumption about what ordinary adults can endure when extraordinary circumstances demand heroism that extends far beyond personal survival to encompass preservation of innocence and hope for future generations. The foundation of their relationship was built through parallel experiences with grief that taught each of them how quickly happiness can be destroyed by forces beyond human control. Joyce's struggles as single mother raising sons without adequate support while fighting supernatural threats that no one else would acknowledge, finding resonance with Hopper's journey through alcoholism and isolation following Sarah's death. their separate paths through darkness, preparing them for partnership that could withstand pressures that might destroy connections based solely on mutual attraction or conventional compatibility. The practical wisdom that both adults bring to supernatural conflicts reflects years of experience with real-world problems that required creative solutions and persistent effort rather than dramatic gestures or heroic proclamations. Their understanding that effective protection of vulnerable people depends upon careful planning and steady commitment rather than impulsive bravery, providing foundation for leadership that can coordinate community response to threats that operate according to principles completely alien to normal human experience and democratic decision-making processes. The trust that develops between Joyce and Hopper through repeated exposure to impossible situations where conventional authority proves inadequate creates partnership based on mutual respect for each other's judgment and capabilities, rather than traditional gender roles or social expectations about romantic relationships. Their collaboration during supernatural crises, demonstrating how love can manifest through shared responsibility and practical support that honors individual strengths while compensating for personal limitations that everyone possesses, regardless of their heroic potential. The parental instincts that both Joyce and Hopper extend beyond their biological children to encompass protective care for all young people caught in supernatural warfare reflects understanding that family bonds transcend legal relationships to include anyone who needs adult guidance and support during circumstances that threaten to destroy childhood innocence and psychological security that developing personalities require for healthy growth. Their willingness to risk personal safety for teenagers who are not their responsibility, demonstrating moral commitment that defines true heroism. The communication that characterizes their relationship operates through understanding that transcends verbal expression to encompass intuitive awareness of each other's thoughts and feelings during crisis situations where conventional coordination might prove too slow or inadequate for responding effectively to rapidly changing circumstances. Their ability to anticipate and complement each other's actions, reflecting intimacy that emerges from shared danger and mutual dependence, rather than simply romantic attraction or domestic compatibility. The sacrifice that their relationship requires includes acceptance that personal happiness must remain secondary to collective survival. When supernatural forces threaten community welfare, their recognition that love expressed through duty and protection may prove more valuable than intimate moments or private contentment, creating partnership that serves purposes larger than individual fulfillment while simultaneously providing emotional support that enables sustained heroism under conditions that would overwhelm people facing such challenges alone. The leadership that Joyce and Hopper provide for Hawkins during supernatural emergencies reflects natural authority that emerges from demonstrated competence and genuine concern for community welfare rather than official position or political appointment. Their ability to inspire confidence and coordinate civilian response to otherworldly threats, proving that moral clarity and practical experience can be more valuable than institutional credentials. When circumstances demand authentic heroism rather than bureaucratic procedure, the hope that sustains their relationship depends upon shared vision of future where children can grow up safely without constant threat from forces that seek to corrupt innocence or eliminate individual autonomy through absorption into collective consciousness that recognizes no value in personal relationships or individual identity. Their commitment to creating conditions where love and family bonds can flourish, providing motivation for choices that transcend self-preservation to encompass defense of values that make existence meaningful rather than merely efficient. The healing that Joyce and Hopper find through their partnership demonstrates how authentic love can emerge from shared trauma when two people choose to support each other rather than retreat into isolation that might seem safer, but ultimately proves sterile and unfulfilling. Their relationship providing evidence that happiness remains possible even after devastating loss, when commitment to protecting others creates purpose that transcends personal grief while honoring memory of those who cannot be saved or recovered. The strategy that guides their approach to supernatural conflict emphasizes protection of innocent people over victory against supernatural enemies, their understanding that some battles cannot be won through violence alone, requiring tactics that prioritize preservation of human values and community bonds that give meaning to survival, rather than simply achieving military objectives that might prove hollow if accomplished through methods that destroy everything worth defending against cosmic horror that threatens essential humanity. The community that rallies around Joyce and Hopper's leadership during supernatural crises reflects recognition that ordinary citizens possess reserves of courage and determination that institutional authority often underestimates. Their ability to organize civilian resistance against otherworldly threats, demonstrating how democratic values and social cooperation can provide foundation for heroism that transcends individual capabilities while maintaining respect for personal autonomy and voluntary participation in collective defense efforts. The future that Joyce and Hopper envision together requires successful resolution of supernatural conflicts that will either restore normal community life or create new forms of existence where extraordinary threats and enhanced abilities become permanent aspects of reality that must be managed. Through ongoing vigilance and mutual support, their hope for domestic happiness, that includes both their individual children and extended family of young people. They have helped protect, reflecting, understanding that true victory preserves possibilities for ordinary joy, alongside extraordinary responsibility. The legacy that their partnership creates extends beyond personal relationship to encompass model of adult leadership that demonstrates how love can manifest through service to community welfare and protection of vulnerable individuals, their example providing inspiration for others who face impossible choices between personal safety and moral duty, while proving that authentic heroism emerges from commitment to values that transcend self-interest to serve purposes larger than individual survival or conventional success as measured by material comfort or social recognition. The strength that Joyce and Hopper derive from each other enables sustained resistance against forces that seek to eliminate human civilization through corruption of individual consciousness and destruction of personal relationships that create emotional bonds, transcending rational calculation. Their partnership serving as anchor point for community identity that refuses to surrender essential humanity, even when survival seems to require accommodation with cosmic horror, that promises efficiency and order while delivering spiritual death disguised as evolutionary advancement toward collective unity that resembles perfection but actually represents elimination of everything, that makes existence worth preserving, rather than simply continuing through forms of consciousness that serve alien purposes rather than human, flourishing and individual authenticity that creates possibility for genuine love between separate beings who choose connection despite vulnerability. The parallel dimension that has served as staging ground for supernatural invasion of Hawkins exists in state of perpetual decay, that mirrors the corruption spreading through reality itself. Its ash-filled atmosphere and vine-covered structures representing not simply alternate version of familiar locations, but rather preview of what all existence might become if cosmic horror succeeds in merging dimensions according to principles that prioritize entropy and collective absorption over individual consciousness, and the creative diversity that emerges from separate minds, choosing connection rather than surrendering autonomy to hive mind unity. The transformation that has occurred within the Upside Down throughout years of supernatural conflict reflects gradual adaptation to serve purposes that extend far beyond simple parallel reality to encompass staging area for invasion that would eliminate barriers between worlds, the increasing stability of structures and environmental conditions suggesting preparation for permanent occupation by entities whose existence depends upon consuming emotional energy generated by conscious beings who experience joy and suffering as separate individuals rather than fragments of collective awareness. The possibility that dimensional barriers might dissolve completely during final confrontation between human resistance and cosmic horror carries implications that transcend simple victory or defeat to encompass fundamental alteration of physical laws governing reality. The merger creating conditions where normal concepts of space and time and individual identity might become meaningless, while consciousness itself transforms according to principles that serve expansion of hive mind, intelligence rather than preservation of diversity that makes authentic relationship and creative expression possible. The architecture that has emerged within the Upside Down demonstrates influence of intelligence that operates according to geometric principles completely alien to human understanding of functional design, the organic structures and impossible angles reflecting thought processes that prioritize collective efficiency over individual comfort, while creating environments that facilitate control and absorption of separate consciousness into prioritize collective efficiency. Unified awareness that recognizes no boundaries between self and other or distinction between voluntary cooperation and involuntary servitude. The atmospheric conditions that characterize the parallel dimension suggest environmental engineering designed to support forms of life fundamentally different from terrestrial biology. The toxic air and constant electrical storms, creating selective pressure that would eliminate human presence while providing optimal conditions for entities whose existence depends upon energy patterns and chemical processes that transcend normal limitations of matter and biological function as understood through conventional scientific investigation. The temporal mechanics that govern events within the Upside Down operate according to principles that allow past and future to influence present circumstances in ways that linear time cannot accommodate. The ability of hive mind intelligence to coordinate activities across multiple dimensional phases, enabling strategic planning that transcends normal cause and effect relationships while providing tactical advantages that human resistance cannot match through conventional military thinking or democratic decision-making processes that require consensus building. The connection between upside-down locations and their primary dimension counterparts reflects deliberate mapping designed to facilitate invasion through systematic replacement of familiar environments with corrupted versions that serve alien purposes, the gradual bleeding of supernatural influence into normal reality, creating conditions where distinction between dimensions becomes increasingly difficult to maintain, while residents adapt unconsciously to changes that prepare them for absorption into collective consciousness. The creatures that inhabit the parallel dimension function as components of larger organism rather than independent life forms. Their coordinated behavior and shared awareness demonstrating how individual identity dissolves within hive mind structure that prioritizes collective function over personal autonomy while maintaining enough diversity to accomplish specialized tasks that unified consciousness might not be able to perform through simple replication of identical capabilities and perspectives. The energy sources that sustain supernatural activity within both dimensions appear to derive from emotional responses generated by conscious beings who experience fear and love and hope as individual phenomena. The parasitic relationship between hive mind entities and human civilization, suggesting that complete conquest would ultimately prove self-defeating by eliminating the very sources of nourishment that cosmic horror requires for continued existence and expansion into additional realities. The resistance that human consciousness offers against dimensional merger stems from fundamental incompatibility between individual identity and collective absorption. The inability of hive mind intelligence to completely eliminate personal autonomy and emotional bonds, creating persistent sources of disruption that prevent perfect unity while generating energy patterns that feed cosmic entities whose appetite for such experiences makes complete victory impossible without destroying their own sustenance through successful consumption of diversity. The healing that might occur within damaged reality following resolution of supernatural crisis would require not simple restoration of previous conditions, but rather integration of changes that exposure to cosmic forces has made permanent. Within human consciousness, the enhanced abilities and expanded awareness that some individuals have developed, creating new possibilities for existence that honor both individual identity and collective responsibility, while maintaining barriers necessary for protecting essential humanity. The monitoring systems that would need to be established following dimensional stabilization reflect recognition that cosmic threats represent ongoing rather than temporary challenges to human civilization. The prevention of future invasion requiring sustained vigilance and institutional memory that can preserve knowledge about supernatural phenomena while preventing abuse of such information for purposes that conflict with democratic values and individual rights that give meaning to survival rather than simple continuation of species. The transformation that Hawkins might undergo during post-supernatural reconstruction could serve as model for communities learning to coexist with enhanced reality, where extraordinary abilities and cosmic awareness become integrated aspects of daily life, rather than emergency responses to crisis situations. The development of new social structures and educational programs that accommodate expanded understanding of consciousness and interdimensional mechanics while preserving human values and personal relationships. The legacy that emerges from successful resistance against cosmic horror would demonstrate humanity's capacity for growth and adaptation without sacrifice of essential characteristics that distinguish conscious beings who choose connection from hive mind entities that eliminate choice through absorption of individual will into collective purpose. The victory serving as evidence that diversity and personal autonomy can coexist with cosmic awareness and enhanced capabilities when guided by wisdom that prioritizes love over efficiency. The future that awaits beyond resolution of dimensional crisis depends upon choices made during final confrontation between human resistance and cosmic horror. The possibility that some supernatural elements might remain as permanent aspects of enhanced reality, creating opportunities for continued growth and exploration, while requiring ongoing commitment to values that protect individual consciousness and personal relationships from absorption into collective awareness that promises unity while delivering spiritual death through elimination of everything that makes existence worth preserving, rather than simply continuing through forms of consciousness that serve alien purposes, incompatible with authentic human flourishing and creative expression. The possibility that heroism might demand ultimate sacrifice from those who have already given more than any human being should be expected to endure creates moral complexity that transcends simple equations of individual loss balanced against collective salvation. The characters who have survived years of supernatural warfare, carrying within themselves scars and wisdom that position them uniquely to understand what victory might cost, while simultaneously making them most vulnerable to influences that could transform their suffering into weapon against everything they have fought to protect throughout their journey from innocence to experience. The redemption that awaits characters whose choices have led them toward darkness reflects hope that authentic transformation remains possible even when corruption appears complete. Henry Creel's potential liberation from hive mind possession, offering evidence that individual consciousness possesses resilience that cosmic predators cannot entirely destroy, while Will Byers' struggle against similar influence, demonstrates how love and loyalty can provide foundation for resistance that transcends personal survival to encompass preservation of values that give meaning to existence beyond simple continuation of biological function or species perpetuation. The sacrifice that might be required to restore balance between dimensions could demand not just death, but willing surrender of enhanced abilities and expanded awareness that some characters have developed through supernatural exposure. Their choice to relinquish extraordinary capabilities for sake of protecting ordinary human experience, reflecting understanding that true heroism sometimes requires accepting limitations that preserve essential humanity while eliminating temptations that might lead toward corruption disguised as evolutionary advancement or cosmic enlightenment. The permanence that death might possess in reality, where dimensional barriers have been weakened, depends upon whether love and memory can transcend physical dissolution to create forms of connection that honor departed individuals, while providing comfort and guidance for survivors who must continue fighting battles that extend beyond immediate crisis to encompass ongoing defense of values and relationships that give meaning to victory, rather than simply representing strategic objectives that could be achieved through methods conflicting with moral principles. The alternative that multiple dimensional existence might offer to conventional concepts of mortality suggests possibilities for reunion and continued relationship that transcend normal limitations of space and time, though such opportunities might require choices about identity and consciousness that transform individuals in ways that preserve essential characteristics, while adapting to existence that operates according to principles fundamentally different from terrestrial experience and human understanding of what constitutes authentic life. The found families that have emerged through shared supernatural crisis represent bonds that might prove stronger than biological relationships when faced with ultimate tests of loyalty and commitment. The chosen connections between individuals who have supported each other through impossible circumstances, creating networks of mutual responsibility that could sustain collective resistance against forces seeking to eliminate personal autonomy and individual identity through absorption into hive mind consciousness that recognizes no value in diversity or creative expression. The resolution that honors both tragic loss and hopeful possibility requires acknowledgement that some wounds cannot be healed through conventional means, while maintaining faith that authentic connection between conscious beings possesses power to transcend even cosmic horror when sustained by commitment to values that prioritize love over efficiency and individual worth over collective function, the balance between grief and joy, reflecting reality, where meaningful existence necessarily includes suffering, that gives depth and significance to moments of happiness and peace. The containment that might represent most realistic solution to supernatural threats acknowledges limitations of human capability while creating framework for ongoing vigilance that could prevent future crisis through sustained attention to dimensional stability and early intervention when cosmic influences begin manifesting within normal reality. The institutionalization of supernatural monitoring, requiring democratic oversight and ethical guidelines that protect both community welfare and individual rights from abuse, by agencies whose power might tempt them toward authoritarian control. The price that survival might exact from characters who have witnessed cosmic horror includes psychological burden of knowledge that most people cannot share or understand. Their isolation within normal social contexts, creating need for continued connection with others who have experienced similar trauma while working to build bridges between extraordinary experience and ordinary life that allow integration rather than permanent separation from communities they have fought to protect and preserve. The victory that emerges from successful resistance against dimensional invasion might prove bittersweet when measured against cost in human lives and irreversible changes in consciousness that supernatural exposure has created within survivors. Their enhanced abilities and expanded awareness, positioning them as guardians who must remain vigilant against future threats, while learning to find happiness and meaning within existence that can never return to previous innocence or simplicity that preceded their encounter with cosmic forces. The growth that characters achieve through supernatural warfare demonstrates human capacity for adaptation and moral development under conditions that test every assumption about individual potential and collective capability. Their evolution from ordinary children and adults into heroes, whose choices determine species survival, reflecting possibilities that exist within everyone. When circumstances demand transcendence of personal limitations through commitment to purposes larger than individual comfort or conventional success, as measured by material achievement. The hope that sustains characters through darkest moments of supernatural crisis derives from understanding that authentic love between separate beings creates something more valuable than cosmic unity achieved through elimination of individual consciousness. Their refusal to surrender personal relationships and community bonds for sake of efficiency or order, demonstrating wisdom that recognizes diversity and creative expression as essential elements that give meaning to existence rather than obstacles to overcome through evolutionary advancement toward collective awareness. The new beginnings that await beyond resolution of supernatural conflict depend upon choices made during final confrontation between human resistance and cosmic horror. The possibility that enhanced reality might include permanent integration of extraordinary abilities and interdimensional awareness, creating opportunities for continued exploration and development that honor both individual identity, collective responsibility, while maintaining values that protect essential humanity from absorption into hive-mind consciousness that promises perfection through elimination of everything that makes existence worth preserving. The legacy that emerges from successful defense against cosmic invasion would establish precedent for how conscious beings can resist absorption into collective awareness while remaining open to growth and connection that transcends individual limitations. The demonstration that love and loyalty can survive even ultimate tests of commitment providing inspiration for future generations who might face similar challenges, requiring courage to choose diversity over unity and authentic relationship over efficient organization that serves alien purposes, rather than human flourishing and creative expression that emerges from individuals who remain free to choose connection, rather than being compelled toward absorption into consciousness that recognizes no boundaries between self and other, while eliminating possibility for genuine surprise or discovery that requires separate minds choosing to share their unique perspectives and experiences. And so we close this gentle exploration of possibilities, each theory a thread in the tapestry of speculation that surrounds Hawkins' final chapter. From Henry's tragic loss of self to Will's dangerous evolution, from Carly's imprisonment to Eleven's ultimate destiny, we see how every theory carries within it both hope and heartbreak. These quiet speculations, born from love for characters who have become family, remind us that the most powerful force in any universe is the connection between hearts that refuse to surrender, whether through sacrifice or salvation, through loss or victory. The bonds forged in Hawkins' supernatural crucible will determine not just survival, but what survival means. Rest now in the knowledge that every ending contains the seeds of new beginnings, and that even in the darkest theories, love remains the constant that guides our heroes home. Let these gentle possibilities carry you into dreams where friendship conquers all fears, where ordinary hearts prove extraordinary, and where the final chapter writes itself in hope rather than despair. Sweet dreams from the theories of Hawkins, where every speculation is wrapped in love for the story that brought us all together.